Okay, thank you for the introduction. So yes, my name is Sjoerd Hendriks. I'm doing a PhD in interactive tables at Chalmers University, and I'm presenting this review paper on actuated table designs on behalf of my colleagues Michael Heron and Mohammad Obaid, who's sitting here as well. So as part of my PhD, I spend a lot of time thinking about interaction with tables, but now I don't really assume that you do the same thing. So I want to open up with this: what is an actuated table in the first place? And for that, I think it's important to introduce you to some different interaction styles that we've seen in the past research in HCI on interactive tables. So during our review, we came across two other literature reviews on interactive tabletops. And we classified three different styles of interactions with tables. So first one is a digital tabletop, which you can see as a large tablet that is embedded into the tabletop, which has a digital graphical user interface and allows for touchscreen interaction. Second, we see a more tangible interaction style with tables where so-called tangibles or ficons are embedded, or like they're external to the table. These are like physical blocks that allow you to interact in a more tangible style. I have one famous example is the React table that is shown here. So this is a music synthesizer that allows people to create music in real time using this tangible interaction style on the table. Then another example is Transform. This is part of a series of actuated tabletops that were developed at MIT, which have these 3D pixels that are in the tabletop that allow for a lot of different use cases. So here, just a video to give you an impression. Okay, so based on these previous literature reviews and in combination with trends of shape-changing interfaces as well as robotic furniture, we see a new type of interaction style with tables, which we refer to as actuated tables. And we define these tables as table-like interfaces that can kinetically change shape physically, or change their position or their composition, orientation, or location. So the main is we're looking at the table as a whole and not only at the tabletop only. So some examples that we have in this literature review is this one is called Active Ergo, which is an office desk that can change height based on the posture of the user sitting behind the desk. So what it does is it can track the posture and adapt as people progress in different tasks on the computer. Another example, which has a bit more of the shape-changing attributes in it, is called Kirigami table. So there is also a video here to show. So the idea behind this table is that based on transitions between group sessions and individual sessions when working together, the table can adjust its shape to afford like a setup that is ideal for individual work and then transition to collaborative group work. Then we've also come across some examples that are more inquiry driven. So these are more theory inspired. The table, non-table, and the deform table. And what these artifacts do, they try to challenge the current association that people have with non-interactive tables. And they try to challenge, okay, how is it like to live with an interactive table in your household? So they deploy them for longer term studies. Good. So the goal for our review is to create an overview of the current state of these actuated table designs. And for that, we look into three different themes. So the first theme is concept-centered. And by that, we're looking into the application. What is the purpose of the table? What is the context? Where does this table, where is it deployed? Who are the users? Is it intended for single or multiple users? Then we're looking also at table-centered aspects. So this is really on the artifact itself. What is the actuation form? I will talk a little bit about that soon as well. What kind of interaction modalities do we notice? So what kind of sensing capabilities does the table have? And what sort of actuation does it exert into its environment? Also, we're interested to look into the aesthetic motivations, like why is the table designed in this way in terms of the aesthetics? And then also more towards the research approach, how are these tables studied? How are they evaluated? Is it in a lab? Is it in a field context? and also how autonomous can these tables be used? How much supervision does it require from the research team? So as for the method, we searched the ACM library for the last decade. We used the keywords table, tabletop, design with asterisks, and interact with asterisks. And we were really looking at the design concepts that have a prototype with them. So initially we started to look into full papers, demo, but later we also extended to demo reports and extended abstracts. So, and we excluded, so we started off with 198 papers, but when we went, so we divided this between the authors to manually look at the titles and the abstracts and look for these actuated tables. And through these discussions that we had, like whether this should be eliminated or not, based on the exclusion criteria, we reiterated on it, and we ended up with 11 papers, which we expanded through reference scrolling and broadening the criteria to also include extended abstracts and demos. So then in the end, we ended up with 15 actuated tables. So here is an overview of all of the coding criteria and the data. Not going to go into that now this much, but if you want to have a look at it and have a read on the data for yourself, then please have a look at the paper. I also do want to, before we go into the discussion, I want to show some of these actuation forms that we came across in these 15 niche tables. So first one is still also that was part of the introduction, this actuated tabletop, where we have like an actuation happening and usually at the center of the tabletop itself. But then we also have mobile tables that can physically move around the space. So they just move around, and we've got the height changing tables, which you might recognize from the typical office desk that goes up and down. And then we also have these shape changing tables that can actually change the layout into going, for example, from like a more square to a round shape. And the kirigami table that we introduced in the introduction is also an example of that. Good. So for the discussion, so we came across some qualities that separate actuated tables from the other types of interactions with tables that we've seen before. So one of them is definitely the adaptability, that the ability to change shape or to move physically allows for adaptation to individual users. Think about people with disabilities, but also it can be like the active ergo that adapts to the posture of the person, also when changing tasks behind the computer, for example. Also flexibility. So here is one example, proxemic transitions, which can transition from a flat normal table to also to a wall panel, an interactive wall panel. And this kind of flexibility we see this becoming more and more important as the amount of space and like decreases, and we can have these artifacts fulfilling multiple purposes in a room. And then lastly, we see a role of social mediation. So because all of these tables have some type of computational element to them, they have a certain amount of agency as well that can also be used to guide people around the table or to spark some discussion. An example here is the turntable, which has a tabletop that can inflate in different parts of the table, and then it has this ball going around to kind of delegate turns of speaking in group discussions. So we noticed that, well, first of all, we're looking at 15 designs, which is like a limited scope, but within that limited scope, we see a lot of overlap in terms of the applications. So we see collaboration coming back, ergonomics, to healthcare, inquiry-driven, and the social mediation. But what we found surprising is that we didn't see any, for example, applications related to gaming or playful applications or accessibility and educational ones. And these are like applications that we see also well covered in other interactive tabletops, but not so much yet in the actuated tables. Then finally, we saw that there were no actuated tables that were built for outdoor environments. All of them were placed indoor. And I guess this could be explained because all of these tables are still in like a prototypical stage, so they're not fully flat, like fully developed products. But we do see opportunity of also just thinking for putting these tables outdoor in public spaces. And we have already started with the master program. We have already started with students to prototype some tables that are also meant to be used outdoors. For example, in Sweden, it gets very cold. And then the students came up with a design that has a heating element and shape-changing properties to attract people in for when they're waiting for a bus stop, for example. Yes. These initial preliminary actuation forms are by no means complete. So I'm 100% sure there is a lot more types of actuations that are still to be discovered. And we will also want to open up this the community to come up with new types of actuations for tables. And then finally, there is something to be said about, so all of these tables have some sort of movement in the table, right? So can we also design for that movement in terms of like animations or sort of to create a certain type of body language for the table that it can communicate like its intentions or its internal processing. So we can play around with like the speed of the movement, acceleration, the direction, which could be useful for like this body language, but it could also be for aesthetic or playful or more artistic purposes too. Okay, so to wrap it up, some of the key takeaways after this presentation. So we first defined actuated tables as an interactive table with the ability to physically move itself or part of itself through kinetically changing its shape, position, composition, orientation, or location. And we summarized the state of actuated table designs within the last decade of research in HCI. And we looked into the concept-centered, the table-centered, and the research-centered attributes, so still quite broad. And then we introduced the preliminary actuation forms, which we also want to further develop and see what other types of actuations are out there. We found that some of the common qualities are the adaptability, the flexibility, and the social mediation. And then we've identified some gaps in the current research. So we would also want to invite research to look into the accessibility side, the gaming side, and also making tables for outdoor spaces. And then finally, we discuss how the movement of actuation can be further explored as a design resource or something to design for as well. So that's it for this presentation. So I'm very curious what you think about this topic and if you can come up with some new types of applications for this type of table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting review and presentation. So any questions, please, in the audience? If I may, I have
of course.
A question, because all this looks really interesting to me, and it really captured my attention. But I was wondering this, I can surely understand the wow factor, and I can surely understand the technological challenge for creating these types of interfaces. But I was wondering, I'd like to ask you, based on your deep research on that, what do you think would be a possible application that really benefits from this technology? I mean, I'm wondering that, for example, tables that can just change position or change height or change rotation is something that we can do manually right now. So why do we need to pay much money probably to have an automated way of doing that, maybe in response to the environment? So what do you think would be some interesting application areas that will really benefit? Thank you.
Yes, good question. Yeah, I can talk here. That's a good question. So I think if I just look at the review, what's already out there, there was one example. It was a robotic table for a hospital setting for working with post-stroke adults. And then what they argue is that this actuation that is automated to some extent also helps for reducing like a load on the healthcare professionals. So it can become more of like a standalone design that doesn't require supervision now.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Professor.
Yeah.
Now, a table, it's interesting to see your definition of the table.
Yeah.
What do you consider a table and non-table thing? Because if you perhaps you've done already, because I liked your work. I found it very inspiring, very interesting, with a lot of potential. And perhaps it's a good direction for new tables for the future tables. Now, you are familiar with the term affordance, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we think about the table, the way we use it, and I would start from ethnography on usage of tables in everyday life, in professional environments, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Now, the affordances of tables are, it's an area, a space, surface, horizontal surface, where you can afford putting stuff on or information that I can read or interact with.
Yeah.
Now, one basic affordance of this is if we have a group of people around the table, because it's not usually not interesting for a single person's table, but more social aspect you very clearly pointed out to. One affordance I can understand clearly is that part of the group sees the information, can read it. The other side of the table cannot, because it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So this is a clear affordance, which perhaps we need to tackle in future tables. I don't know, but it's something which happens. Now, if you change the table and put it, make it a board on the wall, then we lose that, but we change the posture of the people. Have to stand up and go close and start reading. So change the dynamics of interaction and the usage of the table. And by the way, that's not a table anymore. It's a board.
True.
So the tableness definition needs to define, is the table a horizontal surface? What is the definition? You need to define the boundaries.
Yes.
Okay, so starting with that, ethnography, what we use tables for. Second, clear affordances of tables. I mean, like the reading a text on a table is not uniform. I mean, Professor earlier on in the speech said for all, so all around the table don't have the same affordance. They don't see the information the same way. We address this and all sorts of other issues, like you said, the height. I mean, if I'm standing up on a table, I'm a very short person, then I don't interact with the table in the same way. So these are a list of interesting points in the current technology, like wooden tables or the everyday tables, and then reflect into your direction of enhanced future tables and see which one of those you need to address. And then also the direction which you very nicely covered, and that's the question of previous speaker, that how we envisage the usage of these future tables. But otherwise, I really liked your talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, there is a lot to think about, and like it's interesting that you mentioned the tableness, because last summer I was at a summer school, and then the discussion came up as well, like what defines a table in the first place, and how we've come across like examples that like in Gothenburg we went on like a walk to look at all kinds of tables we could find in the city, just non-interactive ones. And then we also saw that, for example, chopped off a tree that's like a wooden trunk, basically, that has been appropriated to become a table as well. Yeah. So,
Just a little addition to what Nikos said. In parallel with the affordances, you can see also the constraints.
Yeah.
The tables, both the different types of tables. This addition.
Yes, thank you.